Hey there, Canyon Hills. My name's John, and I am the student ministry pastor at our church. And I'm thankful to be able to come to you guys today with a devotional. And I and my family are probably doing about how you are. We're trying to do our best. So that means we're probably doing like okay at waiting patiently for the day in which we can all be together. But until then, I'm thankful to be able just to share this devotional with you today. And it comes out of the book of Proverbs. And we're going to go to chapter 12, where we're going to look at verse 18. And like a lot of verses in Proverbs, it's pretty short, but it packs a punch. And so here is Proverbs 12, verse 18. It says this, it says, "There is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." In my life group that my wife and I are in, we're going through the book of Proverbs, and I came across this first one I've read before, but its applicableness to just the time that we were living really stood out to me, in that we find ourselves in a time in which what we can do is pretty limited, right? It's pretty restricted, which probably only highlights the power of the things that we can say. It only highlights just how much weight our words carry. And I'll admit that I think it's easy for us, and even my own mind, to begin to look ahead to the future and go like, I can't wait until the real things can happen, when things can open up and the things of meaning can happen again. And there's certain truth to that there are meaningful things that we haven't been able to do. But one of the meaningful gifts that we have been given by God to steward in this time is our words, especially in a time in which that may be all that we can do for one another, is speak to one another, maybe even at a distance, or we can only talk to someone electronically. And I think that there are just kind of two things that this verse showed to me as I read through this. And one is convicting, because Proverbs, they tend to start with a warning, but the other part was encouraging, because they usually end with an encouragement. And the first part that stood out, or the warning in here, is just that we can speak words foolishly that are like the thrust of a sword. And I think all of us have been there. That we've said those words, we've heard those words, we've been around when those words have been said. And maybe even in this time, as tensions and worry and frustrations are a little bit higher, it's a little bit easier to say careless words that are like thrusts of a sword. But it would be a little bit superficial, and actually a little bit legalistic, just to say, hey, just don't do that. Just stop saying those things, because it would be to ignore where the root of those words come from. And those come from our heart. Jesus says that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And what that simply means is that the things that I'm saying are far more rooted in what's going on in me than the things that are going on in this world, or that other people are doing. If I'm saying something angry to my family, then the reality is it probably has a whole lot more to do with my sinful and selfish and unspoken, unmet expectations than it does anything that they did. And so if we desire to be people in this season who speak wise words of healing, I think one of the wisest things we can do first is take inventory of not just our words, but the desires or the attitudes or the motives that sit in our heart, that often, when unmet, become the reason that then we say the things that we do. And so it's forced me to ask, and I think it's a good question for us to ask, of, man, what's the desires in my heart that are showing up in the words that I'm saying to the people that I'm around? And the other thing that this said, and just kind of felt it pointed out in a positive way, was the encouragement that you and I have the ability to speak wise words of healing. And what this reminds me of is the one who speaks wise words of healing, the one who brings life with his very words in Genesis 1, the one who in Matthew 9 not only heals body, but also pardons sin with his very words. And you and I, because we are made in the image of God, have power in our words. Now, certainly, we cannot make organic matter come out of nowhere. If we could, that would be really nice, because I would be making In-N-Out Burger come out of nowhere on a daily basis. But you and I are not gods, but we are made in the image of God, and therefore our words do carry great power. In fact, our words are part of being in the made of the image of God that he gifts to us to steward between one another. And if we desire to be people who speak wise words of healing in a difficult time, Man, there is no better place for us to go than the place where the words of the healer are located. That we are fortunate enough to have the Bible. We are fortunate enough to have His Word, and God calls us to meditate on it daily. And when we do that, the very words of Scripture become our own words. They begin to transform our heart, that it might transform the things that we say. But we also know from James 1 that if we desire to speak wise words of healing, if we desire wisdom and we don't have it and we lack it, then we get to ask God boldly in faith that God give us wisdom, and God in His generous goodness will give wisdom to those who ask it in faith. And I think what this verse reminds me is a simple truth that we often forget, is that the act of meditating on Scripture, the act of praying to God and praying the things that He would desire, that these are key not only for myself, but they are key in me growing into and becoming a person who is actually a blessing to other people. My personal quiet time and my prayer life aren't just for me, that they actually, God uses them to transform me into a person who is a blessing to others, even in a difficult time. And that includes being a person who is able to speak wise words of healing. And so my encouragement to you is this, is that we're in a season where our words are just about what we're reduced to. May we be willing to be reminded that the very things that we say to one another are first rooted in our heart, and take inventory of the desires that sit there to explain why we say what we do. We also, I think, need to be reminded that we need to take inventory of where our daily meditation and quiet time sits with God. That if we are going to be a person who's going to speak wise words of healing, we need to go first to the one who speaks wise words. And that may we be reminded that we are fortunate enough to go to a God who is generous, who desires to give wisdom to those who ask it. And as we do that, and do that with consistency, we do have the ability given to us by God, not by ourselves, to grow into people who actually can bring healing with our words rather than sword thrusts.